I'm Erin O'Byrne and welcome to Everything EFL podcast. I'm passionate about serving teachers and I offer training for schools and institutions whose language teachers need a little refresher, a change of mindset and some super practical ideas to put into their classrooms straight away. There is no one-size-fits-all lesson plan, but you've got a friend and support system in me. I can help reduce your overwhelm, give you some teacher inspiration, and improve your work-life balance. How? With some solid advice, takeaways you can try out immediately, and some much-needed teacher love, because your well-being is important too. Are you ready to make small changes one step at a time and remember how amazing you are? Let's go! Hello, you gorgeous teacher. If you're one of my lovely regular listeners, welcome back. If you're brand new to Everything EFL podcast, you are most welcome and I hope you stick around. This episode will be a nice, short and sweet one, and it comes from a conversation I was having with a friend of my husband who he does jiu-jitsu with. This guy is from Brazil and he's been in Ireland for 9 years and his English is brilliant. You know, there's a lot of Irishisms in his speech, and aside from a slight accent, he pretty much sounds C2 native. Now, I know that native term can offend people. That's not my intention, but I'm just saying he sounds like he could be from Ireland. But as a non-native speaker, there's always concern, a worry that his English isn't good enough for any particular situations. And I said, I reassured him his English was tip-top. But it's a question that I often ask my students, and they sometimes ask me, teacher, am I making progress? Do you think my English has improved? And also, I'm sure you recognise this too, I don't think I'm making any progress. And, the majority of the time they actually are, but it's just very difficult to see. And of course, progress is different for everyone. It's very dependent on so many things. Some students are naturally gifted. Some people are working as well, so they get the chance to practice and be exposed to lots of English. But some people are working too much, so they're really tired and they can't learn. Some of them are working online in their own native language. The combination of studying and working can be difficult. In a different environment, it could be just a complete distaste and lack of interest in learning another language. They could be from a difficult background where learning is, the least concern in their life. There are millions of other factors as well, but you know yourself, and for your situation, your students, you know your students best. Progress is usually something that is quite slow, but it doesn't mean it's not happening. And I'm going to share a sentence that I said to my husband's friend, and it's actually the title of this episode. Learning and progress is incremental. It's essential. If you know me and you know that I'm a fan of letting my students in on certain things, and that includes the way the brain works to the degree that I know, because, I'm no expert, we've been through this before. But, telling them the reasons, we're doing certain things and the benefits that they're going to get. And why not extend this to having a conversation with your students about their progress and maybe every now and then reflecting on it. And it could be something as simple as doing it in the form of a survey if they're not very talkative or if they're a bit unconfident. Or you could do it as a group conversation and then listen or get their feedback in an open class forum, whatever works for you and your students. You could have a few different classes and you may have to approach this in 2 or 3 different ways because of dynamics and personalities. And it would be interesting to see what they say. I'm going to predict that a lot of them will probably think that they haven't made that much progress. So how can we show them that they have? Well, we can create moments of contrast and self-awareness to reveal how far they've actually come. So let's get specific. So with the reflection, you can ask them something like, what's something you can do in English now that you couldn't do a couple of months ago? When was the last time you felt confident speaking, listening, reading and writing? What used to feel hard but now feels a little bit easier? What new words and expressions have you learnt or used recently? If they say, I haven't made much progress, don't push back directly. Instead, gently guide them into rediscovering the progress through short tasks that look like this. Could you give your students a speaking or writing task that they did early in the year? And now, you're doing it again. This will be especially good with writing if you have the original text. If you don't or they don't, you could create a text that would reflect your students' skills at the beginning of the year and then ask them to correct it. I think your creativity and your knowledge of your students will guide you into creating a task that your students can get behind or you can get behind. Really showing is the best way, involving your students instead of just saying, yes, you have made progress. I'm sure you've got lots of ideas and I'd love to hear them as well, actually. And as a final side note also, I think it's worth having a conversation with your students about the art of patience and, in my case, of many of my students, pressure, because a lot of my students are very keen, almost impatient sometimes to learn, because, you know, it's like, I'm B1, but I want to be C1 in 6 months because I need to do an IELTS or a master's degree. And sometimes you kind of have to bring them back down to earth and say, well, you know, this may not happen, but it's nothing to do with you. It's just the way that your brain works. It's not about intelligence or skills. It's just language learning can and usually is quite slow, especially if you're teaching in a country where English isn't the first language. So they may not be exposed to it in other areas of their lives. But, you know, they need to know that language learning is slow. It can be very messy. And students are very often unaware of what the learning process entails in terms of their brain. And again, I'm not an expert, but I do know there needs to be repeated exposure to certain things. Let's take the present perfect here because it's just such a good example. Mastering and using this horrible grammar point is often feared, and it's not going to happen in a lesson. Even if your students, in air quotes, understand the concept straight away, which they don't always do, they do a gap fill, a quick practice. Newsflash, that ain't enough, okay? There needs to be constant review. They need to see examples of it, and it needs to be noticed every time it comes up in a text or a transcript or something. There needs to be a conversation about it. So that constant exposure and that constant review is an essential part of your students' learning. And you'll see it happen. Like, the one example I can think of is that every time I see an ing verb after a preposition in a text or a transcript, I'll highlight it and I will say, why is this an ing verb? And you'll be met with a wall of silence, and then you let them in on the whole preposition plus ing thing. And then anytime that comes up again, you just ask the same question. Have a look. Why is this an ing verb? Look at the word before. What is it? It's a preposition. What do we know about prepositions and verbs? And you keep hammering it into them. And even now, months down the line, there's only 1 or 2 students that will be able to answer that question immediately without being prompted. But it's a great example of one, how some students catch on faster than others, and 2, that constant repetition needs to be constant. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to challenge you this week to use a text or a transcript to notice something that you have previously learned. Or should I say taught? So think about, let's say you did the present perfect last week and you're looking at some kind of text or transcript this week and there are examples of the present perfect in there. Think about how you're going to highlight those and talk about them and ask your students questions about them. And even if it's a bit disastrous, that's a good thing because it tells you something, right? It tells you, oh, they haven't quite learnt it yet. Or is there another way I can highlight this? Can I ask this in a different way even? Because this kind of thing takes time. It takes, you need to sort of polish your noticing questions and skills. It takes time, but you will get there in the end. And it's always taking that first step, trying something different, and then just polishing it and refining it and keep at it. Don't just give up the first time something isn't exactly correct or really successful. You know yourself, that's not how life works. Anyway, I would love you to comment or give me a review on Spotify or iTunes if you can. It really helps push me up the ratings and makes me become visible. You can send me a DM. All my social media details and my email are in the show notes. If you've taken inspiration from something that you've heard on one of my pods, why don't you let your colleagues in the staff room know about my podcast? And if you haven't subscribed to Everything EFL yet, why not? Hit that subscribe button. If you think your school can benefit from a CPD session with me, either in face or online, email me. I know I can make you better teachers. Share the link to this podcast. Look after yourselves. Have a safe and peaceful week. Share the love. Bye.